Welcome to Sunday Recap. You are here with myself, Nana, and we are here with Reverend Amy.
Hey, 2 weeks in a row. It's good to be here.
I know, great.
How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, well, thank you. How are you?
Yeah, I'm sure I hope you guys at home are doing well as well. So, Reverend Amy, you preached again.
I did. Why do you make it sound
Sunday.
negative?
No, it's a positive thing. Again.
Great, I loved it. I enjoyed it. Did you enjoy it?
Sunday? Yes, I did.
Great.
I love this series on Elijah. And so, yes, we are on part 2 on this series about Elijah, faith and fire. So, as per usual, if you can, in 3 minutes.
I managed it last week.
You did. So I've got faith. Mustard seed. In 3 minutes, can you give us a summary of what you preached about on Sunday?
Thanks, Nana. We did Elijah part 2 this week. We saw Elijah with the widow of Zarephath, a new kind of miracle about God's provision. So we left it last week where Elijah was in the brook of Kerith. The brook, though, had run dry. Elijah had a choice to make. Would he get angry or would he get listening? And as he listened to God, the word of God came, told him to go to Zarephath. Now, Zarephath was not where Elijah would have wanted to go. It is outside of the region of Israel. It was Jezebel, the evil queen's kind of hometown, but it was also the centre of where worshipped Baal happened to. Like, God was literally telling Elijah to leave this place of safety, to go straight into the heart of enemy territory. And then, as if that wasn't enough, he was to go to an uncomfortable place. He was also to go to an uncomfortable person. God told him that a widow would provide for his needs. Now, Zarephath, I don't know if you knew this beforehand, but Zarephath means furnace or smelting place, where metal is taken from its ore. It's a time of refinement and purification. So Elijah goes to this place, he finds the widow and asks the widow for a cup of water, and then he asks for some bread, and the widow's got nothing left. In fact, she's preparing that day to cook the final meal and then for her and her son to die of starvation. But Elijah tells her to have faith, to trust that God is going to provide. And that's what we see happening. And then, speed up, Amy, the widow's son dies, the woman's distraught. Elijah has somehow caused this, so she thinks. Anyway, Elijah prays over the boy. He is restored to life, and the woman declares that your God is really the God that lives. So in our sermon, we were unpacking what it looks like to be obedient to God. When he tells us to go where we don't want to go, or when he tells us to go to people that we don't want to go to, will we be obedient when it's hard to be obedient as well as when it's too easy? We thought about what it means to really trust in God's provision, to know that he will do what he says he's going to do. And we spoke about just the audacity of the kind of prayer life that Elijah has, the bold statements he makes. You know, verse 1, there's going to be no rain. Verse 14, that she can trust in the provision of God. Or even in this verse where he prays over the boy to come back to life. That's never happened before. Like, I know when we read the Bible, we know lots of examples where people come back to life. This is never. So when Elijah prays this for the first time, like, he's really going out there on that prayer. Yeah. But he believes that God will bring this boy back to life, and he does. So we spoke a little bit about obedience, we spoke a little bit around courage, we spoke a little bit about God's provision, we spoke a little bit about prayer life of Elijah, and we spoke also about vulnerability, because the miracle happens in the life of the widow of Zarephath because she's honest with Elijah about how terrible it is. You know, she says there's nothing left, and because she's open with Elijah, Elijah then makes this declaration that God will provide, and that's what happens.
You spoke about sometimes it's not what God provides, but it's who he provides in those times of need. So Elijah's seen God has come through for him, via a raven, you know, a bird.
True.
You know? And so that in itself is, you know, enough to fill somebody with enough faith to know that God is a great provider.
Right.
But this time round, you know, he's sent to a widow, and you know, a widow, we would normally, in those days as well, they didn't have much. They weren't known to have anything. And so I'm sure that may have cast some kind of, you know, some questions.
Absolutely.
You know, what could a widow provide? But God sends Elijah anyway. So yeah, talk to us about God's provision in the contrast of those.
So there's something really, It's a really interesting thing because Elijah, in the place of isolation in the Kerith Valley, has to rely, you're right, on ravens bringing the food. God provides in a really particular way. But then when God tells Elijah to move, he tells Elijah, your food will now be met through this widow. But this widow also has nothing. So you're right, she's a widow, which at the time, the lowest section of society, very economically vulnerable. And it's no surprise actually that she is struggling even more than others to get by in this time of famine. But God provides for Elijah by sending him to the widow, but he also provides for the widow by sending her Elijah.
Yeah.
Because together they have the resources they need. Albeit she has no resources to start with, there's nothing left. But Elijah's declaration that if they have faith, the flour won't run out, the oil won't run out, is what then comes to pass. But there's something about, for me in this story, about how they both have to be vulnerable. Like Elijah has to be willing to ask for help. She has to be vulnerable about how bad it really is in order for God to then provide. Like, it's interesting, like, God provides for them by not allowing the flour or the oil to run out.
Yeah.
I don't know about you, Nana, but I would be like, I would get bored of flour and oil. But I'd be like, if I was Elijah, I'd be like, where's the meat from the ravens? But God doesn't provide what he wants, but what they need.
Yeah.
So they have enough to get through. They never go hungry in this time of famine and drought. And sometimes we miss the miracle of what God provides for us because we want something else.
It reminds me a little bit about the feeding of the 5,000.
Right. Yeah.
You know, that it just
keeps coming.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
It's an amazing provision. But there's also something of how far they're willing to trust. And I said this in the sermon actually. Elijah learned that in the Kerith Valley, God miraculously provides. And he brought that testimony, that confidence to the woman. I don't know if Elijah would have said with such confidence, just meeting this woman beforehand, God will provide for us. This won't run out. But he knew that he could trust God in the desert. So he could trust God even now in Zarephath as well. Even though it was outside of the region of Israel, even though she was Gentile, even though there were so many barriers at play. But what I love is that in the miracle of the provision, her eyes are open to the true and living God. It's an incredible story.
The story doesn't end there.
Right.
You know, they experience this great miracle, but there's another downturn for this widow. You know, she's already lost her husband, and now she loses her son. And so Elijah's response is, you know, he questions God and asks, you know, don't you care about this woman?
Yeah.
You know, what, you know, and there's this kind of like frantic questioning. And so, you know, it's a very kind of interesting part of the story where we've just seen this miracle, but now there's a dead situation. Yeah, literally. But this is where Elijah's faith kicks in, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Hey, and what I love about the way you're setting the story up is, before Elijah had to spend time in Zarephath, before he'd been welcomed into the home of this Gentile woman, he just might have naturally assumed that God didn't care about the Gentiles. They were outside of God's provision, right? So when Elijah is like frantically questioning, like, God, how would you allow this? Don't you care about her? You see how much his heart has been changed. His understanding of who God's grace is for has been widened because he's seen God's loving provision physically. Now he's saying, but God, don't you care? Like, why did you feed her to then take away the son? And you're right, because she's a widow, it means she's lost her husband. So her son would have been her hope once more to have prosperity, right?
That's right, yeah.
But now the son's gone, she's even more destitute than what she would have been before. But there's this incredible thing where Elijah is crying out to God, saying, don't you care? But that's new for Elijah to recognise that, because
almost
she's Gentile.
interceding for her.
Well, he next level intercedes, because he takes the boy in his arms, he goes upstairs, interestingly to the room that he stayed, and we maybe could have explored this a little bit this morning, which means it was the room he often prayed in, because that was his lodging space. So he takes the boy into the prayer room. He doesn't just allow the boy in the living room, he takes him to the place of prayer. He puts the boy on the bed, he stretches himself over the boy 3 times, which interestingly breaks the commandments, because to touch anyone that was dead was to make yourself unclean too. Elijah doesn't care at this point. He is so self-sacrificially interceding in the hopelessness of the situation, he makes himself unclean, but also gives space for the miracle to happen.
Yeah, he spoke about sharing the struggles,
Right.
so that to give more room for God to move. And you know, so much in our culture is about you know, kind of keeping your problems to yourself, and and you know, I think this widow being at the bottom of the barrel, what did she have to lose?
It's one of the really key parts of the story. Like, Elijah needs the widow because he's got no food, but she has probably been praying as well for some sort of provision, and Elijah is the answer to her prayer. Like, they're both the answer to each other's needs. And you know, God calls us into relationship with him first, but then he also calls us into a right relationship with one another, because we're called to be people who laugh when one another laughs, but also to weep when one another weeps. But actually, a lot of the time, if you're anything like me, like, we want to always present this idea of like we've got it all together. It's really hard to admit we're struggling. Where when we do that, we don't give other people the chance to be the answer to our prayers. We don't give other people the chance to get around and support us.
Right.
Whereas actually, both the widow of Zarephath and Elijah come to know God more because they're both vulnerable about their need for one another. That's right. It's in the vulnerability and the authenticity that the miracle can then happen, because the need is clear. Elijah declares what he knows to be true about God, and then the miraculous food comes. I just think sometimes by our usual answer on a Sunday morning, how's your week been? Yeah, it's been alright. It's been a shocking week. But if someone tells you it's been a rubbish week, we can then pray, we can then walk with, we can then carry the burden, we can then check in on one another. So I think there's a real encouragement in this story to look up, to look out, and to be open to sharing our stories, because people say, you know, why does God allow certain things to happen? And I don't know, we'll never know. But through the difficult times, when we look back, we often see how God has been at work. Whereas if we were open with our stories, we might then be able to encourage someone who is also going through the same situation. It's not because we understand fully what their situation is like, but we can offer words of encouragement of it does get better. There is light somewhere in this tunnel. I've experienced something similar. I don't know exactly how you feel today, but let me tell you what I know to be true about God. Like, do you know what I mean? And so I just love in this story actually the vulnerability of the woman at Zarephath. To be honest, she was having such a rubbish day, she could have just ignored Elijah. She could have just brought the bread and got on with it. But the fact she's like, I literally have nothing left. I'm going home to make the final meal. Then my son and I are going to die. There's such a desperation there. But there's such a openness. It allows space for Elijah to be the solution through the word of God that is to come. And it's just encouragement to all of us. Like, whatever your week's been like, whatever is going on, what's it like to share that story? We sang after the sermon a song, Blessed Be Your Name, which speaks about whether we're in the desert or in a place that's plentiful, even if there's pain in the offering, like we choose to say Blessed Be Your Name. God is still good, but sometimes life is really difficult. And there's an acknowledgement of that in Elijah's story. I love, we're calling the series like Faith and Fire, but this week it really is a sermon around faith in the fire.
That's right.
And then how God refines us and strengthens us. The same way that Elijah had to go to Zarephath, the furnace, God also like refines us in the challenges and the fires that we face as well.
We've definitely seen that in this passage that we've looked at today. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
It's been great unpacking this. If you haven't seen the sermon yet, please go back on to our YouTube channel and check out Reverend Amy's sermon from Sunday. And of course, we'll be here on Tuesday, next Tuesday actually, for Connect Group and continuing to unpack this series of Elijah. And of course, we'll be here again next Sunday, you know, for another session, another part 3 for this Elijah series. And until we see you then, have a great week, and we'll see you then.
Bye.